Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast where we share ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today we're talking about organizational change, change management, and what exactly does IO psychology mean? So I'm joined today by Beth Malillo, and she's going to share a little bit more about her origin story and how she came into the field of IO.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast. This will be a fun time, I think, together with you and I. So I came to IO psychology with 7 years of working experience under my belt. And like many people I've talked to since I first got into this field 10 years ago, I had no idea what IO psychology was. I was going through sort of a career discovery and transition process at the time. I was in social work and working with adults with developmental disabilities in a dehabilitation setting. The people I admired most at work were our occupational therapist, our applied behavior analyst, and some of the other more helping professions in that way. We had a physical therapist on staff as well. So I started talking to them about what they liked about their jobs, and they started telling me about what about the psychology courses they're taking. I thought I might want to become a physical therapist. So I started taking more math, more stats, more stuff in that way. And through my psychology courses, I stumbled into IO psychology. So I was going to a university, taking night classes, and I saw a poster about IO psychology. They were launching a program there. And because I saw the poster, I went to the first class and got more information on the open house, actually, I think was really my first thing. And that's how I ended up moving from social work into IO psychology by way of an HR generalist kind of role.
Gotcha. And so, from your perspective, when we talk about psychology, there are definitely a lot of different disciplines or different avenues an individual can go down. So, what would you say differentiates IO psychology from, let's say, your everyday psychology or other fields within psychology?
Sure. Yeah, because psychology, again, was something I came to well into my early adulthood, and I had to think really kind of deeply about this. What do psychologists even do? I think prior to, going back to school, I really thought psychologists were just clinical psychologists, therapists that see
Yeah,
people in a room,
yeah.
talking to them about the challenges they're having in their daily life. And it wasn't until I went back to grad school that I realized there's actually lots of different branches of psychology and different approaches. There are research psychologists, people who are doing research either in a lab or out in the field, learning more about human behavior, as well as applied psychologists, people who are applying psychological principles in a particular setting. So I think of IO psychology as being this very niche subfield that falls within social psychology, and it's applied, not it's applied in the sense that I have taken a pathway where I'm applying it in the workplace. So again, you're double clicking into
Yeah.
where exactly are we doing and practicing psychology? Only in the workplace, on the applied side, and here's how I'm doing that.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, when I try to share, I have a background in IO psychology. What is that? Oh, it's the psychological principles applied in the workplace. So the immediate response I typically get is, so what does that mean? Are you a counselor in the workplace? How does that work? And it's like, well, not exactly. For me, IO psychology uses psychological principles to not only optimize individual performance, but also team and potentially organizational performance. So would that be a fair way to kind of expand on what you shared in terms of what IO psychology is?
Yes,
Okay.
it's all about people and their behavior in the workplace compared to, say, a finance professional who's thinking about money in the workplace or someone who's thinking about a different kind of topic of business.
Gotcha. And so now when we apply psychological principles to the workplace, how can or how does having a background in IO psychology improve individual, team, or organizational performance? What do we bring to the table that potentially can be a little bit different?
One of the ways I think IOs have an ability to add the most value to the workplace is thinking about human behavior in the workplace. Organizational theory or management theory or finance, you're thinking about the way money is moving, you're thinking
Hmm.
about the strategy of the organization, where are you going to launch your products, how are you going to go to market? But psychologists are thinking about people and their behavior and how that can help or hinder what you're trying to achieve. So looking at motivational theories, what's going to engage people at work, what's going to help them have their best experience. You might be thinking about health or well-being. So how do we reduce burnout or stress? Things like that. That's, I think, some of the sweet spot of where psychology applies in business.
Yep, 100%. And for me, I'm going to show a little bit of my bias here, but in a good way. So for me, fundamentally, when we think of organizations, at least bigger ones, what drives that engine forward typically is the people behind all of that work that's taking place. So if it wasn't for the individual contributors, the teams, the managers, the leaders engaging in work and driving organizational performance forward, organizations wouldn't exist at all. So I think fundamentally, how people function, how people operate, how people thrive in the workplace is just as critical, if not more critical, than what's our return on investment, or what new product are we going to deliver, or how do we best market, this particular product to a broader audience. So for my bias, what I typically share with others is without the people, the organization wouldn't exist at all. And I think psychology fundamentally is the research and practice of how to get, I don't want to say get the most out of people, but to engage people the most so they can deliver the best work. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and
Okay.
I have listened to other episodes you've done. I know you like a good analogy. Here's the
Yeah, yeah,
analogy I use for leaders who might want to focus, say, only on strategy or finance first before people. I say to them, imagine you want to take a journey in your car, and I tell you, you can only have one of these two things. You can have the wheels or you can have the engine.
yeah,
Let's go, pick
yeah,
one. And
yeah.
obviously, that doesn't work. You're not going to be
Right.
able to go anywhere in your car if you don't have both. And that's how I feel about people, but also some of those other elements of business work together.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny when I work with others who don't necessarily have a background in IO. I've heard this come up a couple of times where, we're engaging in this new initiative, we're, restructuring, engaging in this new strategy. Let's go all steam, all forward ahead, all gas, no brakes. And I'm like,
Mm.
I don't know if that's the best approach moving forward. I think we should actually sit down and think about, okay, how are individuals going to be impacted by this before we just drive off a cliff?
It is until you come to that red light,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then you're in
yeah,
a big challenge.
yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So speaking of organizational development, organizational change, there's a lot of change that is happening in our environment today. Of course, obviously, one of the biggest elephants in the room is artificial intelligence, but there's also change in terms of how organizations are structured, different business strategies, different ways to approach work and the workplace. So there's a lot of potential organizational development efforts that may need to take place. So with that said, can you share a little bit more in terms of we'll start with what is organizational development?
Sure. So organizational development is really about building agility and change, and especially change agility within an organization through its systems. And by systems, I don't mean necessarily its technology systems, but about the way the people, the rewards, the management structures, how you organize the company, how all of those fit together, the system in that kind of way.
Gotcha. And so for individuals who want to be organizational develop, I'm going to fumble that probably throughout our entire conversation. Organizational development practitioners. So for individuals who want to get into this field or who find it interesting, can you highlight in terms of what they do or what they bring to the table in terms of business or organizational operations?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just think I'll set the context a little bit here. So I have mainly practiced my organizational development career within for-profit businesses. I've done some volunteering in nonprofit organizations as well as in community organizations. So even though probably most of my examples in the podcast are going to be from the for-profit world, this is actually the kind of role that you can do in nonprofits. In nonprofits, you can do it in social organizing. You can do it in the political realm too. It's not just necessarily a role that only happens in business. That just happens to be where I've done most of my work.
Yeah.
Um, Folks who get interested in organizational development are really systems thinkers and really they're empathetic, taking a people-focused approach to
Let
these
me
kinds of
let me jump
systems.
in real quick, Beth. What
Yep.
is a systems thinker? What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Okay, yeah, great question. And again, like all things I've learned in the last 10 years of my career, not something I entered into my undergraduate career at 18 knowing what it was. So, systems thinker, a system is wow, how do you even say these kinds of
Yeah,
things without using the word system, right? This is,
yeah,
a challenge here. So when I think about a system, it's interconnected parts. Maybe I'll go back to that car analogy again, the engine's not just one piece of metal, it's many pieces of metal, and it's all put together into an entire system that drives this vehicle forward. That's how organizations work too. They're systems of individuals, processes, technology. So a system is a set of connected and interrelated parts.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so I didn't mean to,
Hmm.
run over your train of thought. So I just wanted
No
to be
worries.
sure for those who weren't aware what a systems thinker is. I'm glad you were able to provide a definition. So now coming back to what OD practitioners do. So being a systems thinker is definitely a big part of it. What else would you say is critical?
I think curiosity is really one of
Mm,
those things. And for definitely for organizational development practitioners, definitely for IO psychologists, being curious. Why do things work the way that they work? How did they get to this spot where they work the way they work now? And is that the way that we want them to continue working in the future? Lots and lots of curiosity. So
got
yeah, lots of curiosity. Full stop.
Yeah, I like it. And so, as you were sharing that, as you were trying to bring together the idea of systems and a systems thinker, the analogy, to your point, I do try to, translate kind of complex ideas using analogies. So, the analogy that came to my mind is a symphony
Mm,
orchestrator, the individual who's actually doing the conducting. They may not be performing or yeah, they're not utilizing or performing each individual instrument, but they're making sure the whole orchestra comes together to create pleasing to create, a sound that the audience enjoys. So they kind of look at the whole orchestra, whether it's strings, wind, drums, whatever the instrument may be, are they coming together to create that beautiful sound? Would that be a fair analogy?
yes, and you might have heard it said before, the conductor is the only member of the orchestra who doesn't play an instrument, right? They're just there ensuring that all of the music starts and stops at the same time.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I agree 100%. And so we have a lot of potential change, a lot of factors that are impacting organizational performance. Let's drill down a little bit now. So we have the organization. Let's still drill down to groups and the impact organizational development practitioners can have not just on groups, but then how those groups can potentially impact the broader organization.
Hmm. Yeah, so one way to think about what organizational development practitioners do, or maybe what we sometimes call interventions, which is a funny word, but it is the word that OD practitioners use. What interventions can I use in the system? How can I intervene and make change? Sometimes we think about our interventions as falling into different categories or ways of working with people in organizations. So you might think about how is work structured?
Mm,
So an intervention might be restructuring the organization. Do we want to have two departments work closely together, or can they do their work completely separately and there doesn't need to be collaboration? Or we sometimes think about our interventions as being more people based. So, how do you have some team? How do you improve teamwork? Maybe I'll do a team
yeah,
intervention and
yeah.
think about a team. And then sometimes we think about the human resources, policies, and practices. So, how are you compensated? Your pay, your reward, if you have a 401k or you have some kind of long term incentive or not, you might have that in place as well. And one other thing about these interventions, organizational development practitioners often think about them happening at different levels of the system. So either the individual happening one to one or happening in a group like a work team. I work with my coworker and we both report to my boss, or they might think about happening at the whole system, all of the different functions, finance, et cetera, that are in an organization, or maybe the whole organization or the whole government kind of system that works together.
Gotcha. And I really like how you brought to life the idea of systems thinking. So not only what workflows look like, how work is structured, but also do HR initiatives complement or go against that particular workflow? So an example I like to use is some organizations tout we're a very collaborative, very team driven. We like to make sure individuals are all working together, but they reward individual performance. We see this a lot in sales, where although
Mhm.
an organization may state we're very collaborative, very team oriented, but individuals get the bonuses. And if that's the case, we have these two conflicting messages that an employee receives. So I'm curious, two-part question. Have you experienced something like that? Doesn't necessarily have to be sales, where in terms of different priorities, different initiatives are going in conflict? And if so, have you had an opportunity to resolve that?
Great question. we while we were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about the culture transformation effort, one that I was able to be part of. And it happened at the whole organization level of the place that I worked. So it was one of those things where we saw some misalignment between strategy and then the way that we
Hmm.
were enabling strategy through people. In particular, one thing we wanted to do was decentralize our decision making, make it easier for people to get their work done because they had the power to make decisions for themselves. But we saw that a way that this was being prevented was you needed a lot of approval for purchasing things, right?
Yeah.
And you needed approval for purchasing things at a very low amount of money. So we changed the level of approvals that you needed for purchasing. When it comes down to it, when you give these kinds of examples, sometimes it sounds very simple,
Yeah.
but it can create so much friction for people in their work if and just removing that one tiny barrier can have bigger impacts across the organization.
Yeah, I could definitely see that where I could see potentially individuals hiring the organization say we want to, delegate authority, want to make sure individuals feel empowered, but you have to make sure you fill out all these check boxes before we let you do that. And it's like, wait a second,
Hold on. Yeah.
yeah, something a little fishy here.
Yep. Yes.
And so, to your point, although from an IO perspective or from a broader or more holistic perspective, it seems pretty obvious. Individuals in the workplace, they may not necessarily be as attuned or as sensitive to being able to see that perspective. So, a question I have for you, or I'm curious to get your thoughts on, is it that individuals are too close to the work, meaning they've been in this organization for X number of years, they've operated this way for so long, that it's potentially them struggling to see the forest from the trees? Or can there be an alternative explanation in terms of why it can be so hard to get individuals to see, which to us seems very obvious, but to them may not be as obvious? What are your thoughts there?
I have two thoughts on
Yeah.
that. The first thing is that as humans, as people making sense of the world, there's so much information and data around us in the world already that we necessarily have to select what information we pay
Gotcha.
attention to. If not, analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
right? Should I do this or that? And not just two decisions in our lives all the time, but like hundreds of decisions that we make every day. I think organizations and particularly people in silos and different functions within the organization or groups or work departments, it's that on steroids. Like not
Hmm.
only are you in the company for a long time doing your work the way that you want to do it, you've got all your personal stuff that goes on outside of work, but you're just become used to doing work the way that it's done. You know how it will get you the result that you want to get. You're not paying attention to, and rightfully so, to be efficient, something that's happening in another part of the organization until someone else comes in and says, and takes that macro view and says, hey, look, we've actually got these 10, 20, whatever work teams who are doing all these things and they're working against each other. So you need that outside in perspective.
When it comes to organizational development, it seems as though a big piece of it is change and or change management. So that can be a pretty complex and pretty, I mean, I'm sure we could do a podcast just on that idea in and of itself. But with that said, I'm curious to get your perspective in terms of when it comes to OD, organizational development, and change management. What do you see as some of the major sticking points that individuals show or demonstrate and who are reluctant to engage in that change?
Mm, how much time do we have, right? I mean,
Yeah, maybe like the top one, two, or three.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think of OD as being the bigger umbrella
Mhm.
over change management. I think of change management often as being a particular role that comes in order to implement some kind of larger, broader initiative that's been decided already. And yes, you have a chance to influence and all that. You're right. So different organizations do things differently. You've got your chance to influence, I think, as a practitioner. What a sticking point that comes in for a lot of OD or change practitioners I have found is leaders or people in the organization just why don't we just tell people what to
Yeah.
do? Like, I know what's the right thing to do. We'll just tell them what to do. And we'll just tell them one time, right? So I'll send out a big mass email and
Yeah,
like they know now what they need to
they
do.
should. Yeah.
I
Do they
think
though? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's probably a barrier I run into frequently, and I think a lot of people run into that frequently in change in OD.
Gotcha. Okay. So one of the things when it comes to OD and organizational change that I'm really curious to get your perspective on is change. So who should be the initiator of that change? What I mean by that is, does change unfold more successfully if it's top down, or if it's kind of a grassroots bottom up, or potentially some hybrid in between? And I'm curious to see, from your experience or from your perspective, out of those three options, is there one that kind of fits the mold or that would be, what's the word that I'm looking for, most appropriate or most accessible to success in the change process?
First, I'm going to give my IO psychology
Yeah,
answer. It depends. And
gotcha.
then I'm
Yeah.
going to give you my organizational development answer, which is it's a range, a continuum. So
Okay.
like the IO answer is it depends, and it depends on what kinds of factors. The OD answer is really to what extent and when. So like to what extent does top-down change work, and when is it the right time to use it? And so it's never clear, it's never clear cut. And there are times where top-down change and large-scale culture change is an example of that, where you need significant leadership buy-in from the most high levels of the organization to do it. Now, other kinds of change, maybe you can get away with some of that grassroots kind of activity. And I think you see that maybe not so much in organizations, but maybe more in that political organizing kind of sphere.
Gotcha. And would you say, from your perspective, one approach may be more appropriate for the for-profit sector and one may be more appropriate for the nonprofit sector? Or can they be used kind of interchangeably depending on how the organization is organized?
That what a great question that
Yeah.
sparked my brain that was like,
Yeah.
ooh, I would have to read more research to
Yeah.
know about that. My gut and experiential sense is that it's more about what the goals of the what the goals the organization is trying to achieve are probably trying to do. Like, what kind of change are you trying
Okay.
to make? Change can fall into different kinds of categories. Culture change is one, software implementation is another kind of one, policy change is another one. These are different types of change that might require different strategies and tactics in order to move forward.
Gotcha. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you maybe highlight across those examples you shared, what change can look like and what may operate more effectively in those situations?
Mm,
So let's start with culture change. That
yeah,
is a pretty hefty and pretty, can be a pretty significant change. What approach, whether top down or bottom up, or, kind of something in between, which approach do you think would be most beneficial to get that change up and running?
yeah, if you want to do a large scale culture change, I think one of the things you do is get buy-in from senior leadership, right? So
Okay.
if you think an OD intervention or change intervention, some kind of leadership training is going to be needed there. But if you don't have your whole system, your organization aligned, your policies, your structure, your practices, it's gonna really significantly stymie the culture change you're going after. So a little bit of analysis looking at what needs to change in our policies, what needs to change in our reward practices, what needs to change maybe in our office buildings or environment, like the experience people have when they actually come to work. If they go to an office, those
Yeah.
kinds of things overall, like all those sort of more technical changes need to get looked at well as well.
Gotcha. And another one I was curious to get your thoughts on is when it comes to technological change. I know that is going to be something that's going to play a huge role in organizations moving forward. As I touched upon earlier in our conversation, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse,
Mhm.
but agentic or yeah, agentic AI, AI in general, machine learning, that's going to change basically how we do everything, how we interact with technology. So that potentially can be a really big change initiative. So what's your perspective on what would work best for an organization looking to implement a technology change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to overstate
Yeah,
the
yeah,
change that AI is going to bring to the workplace and maybe to the world. That's my personal view on it. Um, this is one where I see you might think technological change for AI, we're just going to start using it,
yeah.
right? So like that
It,
announcement, this
good luck.
company,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
we're using AI, you have Copilot, go out and take it forward from here. Um, well, if you want to measure change as do we have Copilot enabled on every worker's laptop? I mean, honestly, that is a simple change. You can probably check that box quite
yeah.
quickly. but are they using it? Are they using it in ways that are ethical and valuable for the company? Are they using it in ways that are, supporting the goals of the organization versus hindering them, right? Like I could potentially use AI at my work to just create videos for
Yeah,
myself to share out
yeah,
on
yeah.
my own social media page. That's not the way that I assume most organizations want people to experiment and use AI.
Yeah, I really like what you shared there. It's not just, a checkbox, but it's taking a deeper analysis in terms of the impact utilizing this technology has. Because to your point, if an organization wanted to, they could literally just turn on Copilot and boom, everybody has it. The next kind of more in-depth or more robust metric might be, okay, are they using it? Then we could keep drilling down a little bit deeper. If they are using it, what impact is it having on individual performance? And then keep drilling down deeper and deeper, turn it on, using it, individual performance. How is it contributing to organizational KPIs or OKRs, objectives and key results? So I like how,
Yeah.
it's not just as simple as yes, no, on, off, but we can get really in depth and gain really robust insights if organizations want to bring on board an IO or an OD practitioner to help craft what that looks like.
And this is where I think IO psychologists really
Hmm.
can add value for things because you have that scientific mindset,
Yeah,
that why, that test, experiment, and iterate. And you also have that lens on human behavior because you're not thinking this is good that
yeah.
employees are doing it or this is bad. You're just thinking this is what employees are doing. This is the behavior. Now, how do we want to take that behavior? How do we want to shape it or change it or leave it as it is because actually we want them to do more of it. I think that is a place that IO psychologists really add a lot of value is that sort of neutral observation of behavior.
So from my experience, when it comes to OD and when it comes to change management, and I found this particularly earlier in my career. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this. So for me, earlier in my career, I was really focused in on the data. I was really focusing on kind of the logic and the reasoning behind why a change needed to occur. So we see some issue taking place. Logically, we should then engage in X, Y, and Z. Whenever I tried to approach change from that perspective, I often got the pushback or resistance in terms of implementing the change. As I've grown in kind of my OD and change management philosophy and approach, I've recognized that change is rational, but at the same time, it is just as much, if not more so, emotional. That it can be pretty jarring in terms of, wait, I have to change how I've engaged in this for the last 10 years to all of a sudden do something different. And so I've really learned and have leaned into not relying so much on the logic and the data, but really on the emotion behind a change management practice. Would you or what are your thoughts there in terms of am I on base? Am I off base? Am I off target? Am I talking out of my behind?
You're not talking
Okay,
about how you're behind at all. I mean, heads and hearts is
there
sometimes
you
the
go.
way that
Yep,
I've heard this one kind of talked about. And over over time, I think the same in my career as you. I wanted to know, okay, why is this happening? What is the logical way this is happening? And a lot of times I would think, what is the best way for this to happen?
yep,
What does the science say? What does the research say? And to leaning into more of the OD side, it becomes that range, like I said, what is the best when? What is the option here? And I've really shifted more toward optionality, right? So, like, if we go with this, here's approaches we could take. If we go with this approach, the risk might be this, the reward might be this. If we go with this approach, the risk and the reward might be this. And then the discussion that ensues, especially from leaders and people who have real skin in the game, around who are going to be the face of change or who are going to be the ones who are going to live with the change, often long after me as the change practitioner or OD consultant is in the room, like they are going to be the ones holding on to what happens after this. I want them, leaders who are making decisions, to feel comfortable with why and how they arrived at those decisions. It's the process as much as it is the outcome.
yeah. And I really like how you noted the optionality. So again, reflecting on kind of my early OD change management practice versus what it looks like today. To your point, I was looking for that one right answer, that silver bullet that I know
Yeah.
if individuals do this, it's going to improve performance by X amount. And I try to just beat it. I don't want to say that word, but to really convince individuals, just trust me, this is the way. I've done the research, I've done, the investigation. We should do this and just really pushing for that one or two, maybe three recommendations, as opposed to inviting individuals to be a part of the conversation, inviting them to explore options, and then working together to collaboratively engage in that change management. So that was a pretty rude awakening for me. And I really like how you pointed out optionality can actually be the key to having individuals embrace and engage in a change management effort.
Yeah, I heard somebody use this phrase the other day, and so I'm going to steal it because I loved it.
Yeah.
She said, people support what they help create. So it's not just change being done to people, but it's bringing them along on the journey. How might we make this better?
Gotcha. So sticking on the change management idea here, there are definitely a couple different models, a couple of different approaches that someone can implement when engaging in a change management process. Are you a fan of one over the others? Would you recommend one over the others? What are your thoughts on different models that exist out there?
Man, I mean, I've gone through a range of thoughts on this in my career. First, it has to, it has to be all scientifically backed,
Yeah,
evidence-based models. There's no room for anything else. If it doesn't have, extensive peer-reviewed research behind it, don't use it. I don't say I stuck in that space for too long, only because I began to see a lot of gray. I've come around to the all models are wrong, some are useful kind of saying when it
yeah,
comes to models, and change management is no exception. There are so many models in change management. There are popular ones like the ADKAR framework, which is
yeah.
a model. There's John Cotter's 8-step model. Uh, there's many behavioral science change models as well. Do I have a favorite? I don't know that I have a favorite, but I consider it kind of incumbent on me to be aware of the models, be able to speak the language of my stakeholders when they're talking about a model, and then maybe gently point out some of the things the model doesn't account for, right? So again, all models are wrong, some are useful. So what's not useful about this and what is useful about it?
Yeah, I like it. So I like having a couple of different models in kind of my quiver to be able to pull out, almost like Hawkeye for my Marvel fans,
Mm,
to be able to use the right arrow, the right shot at the right time. And so for me, what I like about models is they provide almost like a guideline, almost like a Thomas guide, if you will. So even before GPS existed, there were Thomas guides, paper maps that it essentially existed to show individuals how to get from point A to point B with different milestones. So once you get to this intersection, you know you're about halfway there. Once you get to this intersection, you're about two-thirds of the way there. And so for me, what I like about models is they provide those milestones or those benchmarks, if you will, those touch points that say we've come to this level, this is the progress we've made, and this is where we still have left to go. From your experience, would you say that is kind of one of the benefits of utilizing or embracing some of these change management models?
yeah, it is really hard to measure progress if you
Yeah,
don't have an endpoint. Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
you've got to have even if the endpoint changes, you can then talk about here's why the endpoint changed. But starting with someplace, this is a vision that we're going toward, and most models have this kind of step in them when it comes to change. Establish an end state, establish a vision. What is your guiding North Star? That's a good place to start. So yes, absolutely a fan of models, even more so when you can get everybody aligned and around one particular model for the organization or group that you're part of.
gotcha. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit here, organizational culture. Now, there are two kind of diverging or pretty different perspectives. From an IO perspective, we know that it can be something that's quantified and something that's measured. Individuals not in IO, individuals more from a business, finance, kind of not IO perspective, they don't think that it's something that is actually real. Of course, they feel it, they know it quote unquote exists, but they're not as convinced that this is something that can be quantified or something that has been researched. What's your perspective? How do we help non-IOs realize, yeah, culture's a big deal, and what I like about Peter Drucker is he shared probably one of the most influential statements when it comes to organizational culture is that org culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no matter how robust, how seamless, how streamlined your strategy might be, without the right organizational culture and people to drive it forward, it's all for naught. So I'll pause there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm totally on Team IO here, of
There you go.
course.
Yeah.
Culture can be measured, and there's different measurement models, different measurement methodologies to do this. Of course, as an IO, I totally nerd out about like, are we going to use the organizational culture assessment
Yeah.
instrument
Yeah.
to measure? Are we going to maybe use Denison's culture model? But those are different questions, I think, for other times. Um, I think folks who are not as nerdy on these topics as you and I are more thinking like, if it can't be one thing, does it have to, then it has to be another thing. I try and bring people away from those binary perspectives and into again, to what extent could it be both? If it comes to measuring culture, what does it look like to measure the way things happen around here? What questions might you want to ask? Usually survey methodology is something that's going to be used at that point. And if again, it depends on the size of the organization you've been. Again, I've done most of my work in large organizations where the resources exist to do large scale surveys, but some people work in small organizations where you're doing smaller surveys. But getting that quantitative data and pairing it with those qualitative stories when it comes to measuring culture, I think that's a must do.
Yep, 100%. And I like how you pointed out the OCAI. I tend to lean to that one when it comes to how do we quantify our organizational culture. So for me, that one I think does a really good job of being able to potentially classify without getting too complex what an individual organizational culture looks like. From there, I like how that also provides kind of a framework to be able to say, this is what it looks like today. What do we want it to look like tomorrow? So I tend to lean into that one. I found it to be pretty useful in helping individuals see or organizations see this is where we are today versus this is where we can be tomorrow.
I love it. I'd love to hear examples of
Yeah.
how you used it. We can maybe talk about that some other time. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. So I like how you pointed out one way to evaluate culture or to start quantifying it is through survey methodology. So I'm going to go there. But another thing we've seen in pop culture is the engagement survey. So we have survey methodology, survey approaches, and we have engagement surveys, which from my experience, I've seen a lot of people who are not IOs start to come into this space. So they think, yeah, let's just throw some engagement survey questions that I found online or I found using ChatGPT. I think these are great. Let's just throw them in. And then whatever the results are, perfect. We can say we're engaged versus not engaged. Can organizations do that? Should they use an IO? What are your thoughts there?
Um, well, I think especially any larger organization should use an IO or someone trained in
Yeah.
survey methodology. Maybe you got your survey methodology through a math or statistics class you took. Maybe you got it through educational training, but you should definitely use somebody to measure your culture who's got some training in surveys. Um, I I don't think you can just throw items into questions. Sorry, I don't think you
Yeah.
just throw questions, which we sometimes call items in IO psychology, into a general purpose survey and then say this is a measure of our culture. You really have to think intentionally about what am I asking, why am I asking it, and is it going to be interpreted in the same way by everybody who takes this survey? Yeah.
Yeah, not only that, but then how do we interpret the results? Are they
Mm-hmm.
reliable? Are they
Yep.
valid? And
Yep.
most organizations just skip that entire step. They think,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I administered this survey, developed a few questions, collected some of the data. High scores means we're good, low scores means we're not. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more that can be analyzed to make sure, okay, this is effective and it's working.
Yep. There can be a lot of nuance in survey data. Absolutely.
Gotcha. Perfect. And so shifting gears again, if an individual wanted to learn more or to get better or develop further in IO, in OD, in change management, what career advice would you give someone who wants to pursue, any or all of these potential career paths?
Mm, yeah. In IO, obviously, I think we talked about your listeners here are probably pursuing some kind of level of IO training or or maybe they're just IO curious how to do
Hmm.
this. So I think a reputable graduate program is a great place to get more IO training. But if you want to read more about science applied to work, there's so many websites and places where you can go to get that information. IO at Work, Science for Work, those are great places. For change and change management and OD, I often meet people who are coming at this without the IO training and background and can still be just as effective and sometimes bring other disciplines and other ways of thinking into this that I learned from. So I think about product management peers I've worked with, UX design, love to learn from those folks. Agile software developers
Yeah.
bring a very unique and interesting perspective into change that I've learned a lot from. A favorite site I have for OD knowledge is open source OD. Great place to go and learn more about it. And just for change, I think I've learned a lot through my classes and formal learning, but I've also learned a lot just from reflecting on what changes have I been through personally, say moving from one house to another, moving from one state to another, and also professionally going from remote, fully in-person working to fully remote working and now to hybrid working and other kinds of changes like that. So what experiences have I had with change reflecting on that and thinking about what were my reactions and how did my reactions differ from other people? I have learned just as much from that as I have from formal learning.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah. So I think we definitely covered a lot of space today. We talked a little about OD, we talked about IO, we talked about change management. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to be sure we had a chance to chat about?
No, wow. I hope more people come into like become more aware of science for work and science for the workplace, not just the website I was mentioning, but like I think a structured scientific approach about people in the workplace 100% belongs in the workplace. Science isn't just something for technology. It isn't just something for medical researchers. It isn't just something for physicists. It's something for people at work. So if there was one thing I wanted to close on, it would be that science belongs in the workplace.
Yeah, I agree. And to kind of touch on that, I think organizations that recognize we can use science to improve the performance of people are going to outperform those that don't. So I
Hmm.
really am encouraging and I align 100% that science should be embraced and encouraged in the workplace to optimize organizational performance.
Yes.
All
Thank you.
right. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, if individuals want to connect with you to learn more about you, where would you recommend they go?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to connect with me. So just, my last name, my first and last name, Beth Malillo on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way for people to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, Beth. Well, it was great to meet with you today. It was a pleasure. And thank you all for listening to the I303 podcast.